would like to thank Dennis for his tireless work in putting this together, and also Emmanuel Comino for his energy and commitment to this campaign. Mine essentially is a talk about activism. I get a little bit frustrated that what we might tend to be doing is rehearsing the arguments for rehearsing the history of the case, as well as the minutiae, which are very important, but nonetheless we are going over ground. I think what we need to do is move, in a sense, kind of radically forward. So I'll say it clearly, and I'll say it often: in full and in place. The Parthenon sculptures must be in full, as much as is now historically possible, and in place in the Acropolis Museum. The Latin expression is wonderful in its brevity and its clarity. In toto, in situ. This for me has become a catchphrase, and I'll be happy to discuss other catchphrases. I think it'd be great to see what other catchphrases can we come up. We need to condense a lot of these ideas into manageable portions. The Greek is also lovely in its own way, in its own rather poetic way. Ensomatomena eki pou oloklirononde. So, what in situ in toto means really is the aesthetic imperative. And to me that is the argument that trumps all other arguments. The aesthetic imperative essentially says that the sculptures must be returned to their original setting and in their original form. I was pleased to hear Anna Marango talk about the British Museum webpage. Last year I wrote what I think is a bit of a savage critique of the British Museum's webpage and the ideology that it contains and the obfuscations that are present there. Anna seemed to go over it in good detail, but I've been there, and I would encourage all of you to go there and look at, kind of the horror in the way that webpage really is. So, we should be in no doubt that we have become stuck. We kind of languish in a post-Mercuri hypnosis. For even though all arguments for retention have been refuted, including the floodgate argument, what is painfully clear is that our desire remains unfulfilled. Yet I would also make the point that the British Museum, that is the UK government and the British Museum, are themselves stuck. They are themselves a victim of their own history, their own legal system, and the contingency of events. Clearly we should not accept the divisions that the British have cleverly created in the Act of 1963 between the British government and the British Museum trustees. And as ex-politician Andrew Dismore said at last year's colloquy, that what has become is just pass the parcel. So in this sense, I think the British are stuck. Of course, public opinion in Britain increasingly favours the reunion of the Parthenon sculptures. So I say that they are a victim of their own history. So I think it's part of our task to find a way to help the British liberate themselves, to emancipate them from their own condition of aesthetic, legal, and indeed moral imprisonment. They are as marooned as we are. I would make the point that in fact ours is a project of emancipation, precisely becoming an operation of politics. We should not be proud of the boast that our project is apolitical, that somehow it is only a cultural property issue, or a justice issue, or even an aesthetic issue. For to do so misses the point. What we need to do is confront the source of our grievances. We need to confront the illegitimacy of the authority that the British claim. So in this way, I read the statement by Emmanuel Comino that there are no more excuses. Indeed, there are no more excuses. We must be brave enough to understand this situation in its political context. So we're in a loop. How do we break out of this loop? How do we interrupt this procedure? How do we create an emancipatory crack in this edifice? What I want to do in this talk is to investigate, instead of 4 issues now, I think I'll only have time for 2, but they do kind of condense what I wanted to say. I think we haven't explored adequately enough the power of narrative. So my talk now is entitled Parthenon Sculptures, Narratives of Possibility. Narrative is many things. I don't want to get caught in the different meanings this word has. What I want to do is restrict its meaning, for the purpose of this talk, to simply mean the stories we tell each other about the Parthenon sculptures. I hope to show that we have a power at our disposal, and this power is the power of narrative. It is also the power that can be most directly applied to education and activism. So we come to the power of one word. How often do we notice this power? But before we can act, this one word has moved on and been replaced by another. I say we must halt and focus on one word. It is impossible to deny the power of language. Words shape our thoughts, thoughts shape our action, and actions shape our reality. I'm constantly struck by the indecision and fractured nature of how we refer to the Parthenon sculptures. It seems we cannot decide whether they are marbles or sculptures. Apart from revealing the uncertainty of the authors or their need to rely on some comfort in making a cheap joke, this blurring, this uncertainty is then planted into the reader. It's like we're hedging our bets. We refer to them as marbles when we want some simple and direct reference, a matter-of-fact term, or we use sculptures when we want to refer to the aesthetic quality of these items. It is precisely this lack of definition, this inability on how we refer to them, that I believe weakens our position. And of course, this plays right into the hands of the British Museum. I mean, this is repeated in Greek. It's the same problem. They both refer to as marmara or glita. I believe we need to make a very clear choice. Just 2 weeks ago in the Sydney Morning Herald, the title of an article, sympathetic to the return of the sculptures, referring to the UNESCO change of policy, had the title, "Rule Changes Could End Britain's Game of Playing with Marbles." At a recent meeting in Melbourne, attended by supporters of reunification, I heard a similar joke about losing our marbles. I claim that such expressions do our campaign harm. It trivialises, it mocks the history, and that we are at fault for allowing that to continue. So again, is it in this way that I read enough is not enough, enough is enough? That in fact this does very much become a political process, and it is a political process expressed through the stories we tell each other about the Parthenon sculpture. So this is my central point. If we want the return of the Phidian works from Britain, then we must insist on the exclusive use of the term Parthenon sculptures. We must replace the word marbles with sculptures. In our conversations, in our literature, in our social media, when we have discussions with people and they use the word marbles, I think we should pull them up. We should stop the conversation and say sculptures. For clearly, they simply are not marbles. They are not stones, they are not elegans, and they certainly aren't the British. Sculptures is obviously the correct term. The insistence on this will help make Elgin and marbles at last defunct, and in doing so, it is hoped that the conceptual obstacles these words sustain will also recede. The British and the media in general still like to refer to them as the so-called Elgin marbles. In many ways, this is because we have left the space open to them to fill it with their own narrative. It's not unlike how, I haven't heard the word once today, Thomas Bruce. I'm not sure why we keep referring to him as the Lord Elgin. To me, he's Thomas Bruce. He's just a man who went there and stole from the Parthenon. So I would almost claim, if we want to use Elgin's name, that we refer to him as simply Thomas Bruce. I do not accept that the authority kept in the word Lord Elgin is one that, again, we need to let go of. So by changing this one word, a whole domain of activism and education opens up for us. We can restart the conversation and again raise awareness. I mean, at a very naive level, if we changed any word of a key phrase, it would have the same effect. It is precisely this effect that we seek. We need to break the circle, break the loop, and engage in a way of enabling the discussion again. So this one word, sculptures, of course, for me embodies the aesthetic imperative, which is in toto, in situ. And I believe it is the argument for reunification. Marbles will no longer do, and for several reasons. Firstly, marbles is only one step away from the association with Elgin. And even for this very reason alone, I think we should abandon the word marbles. The word Elgin itself obviously contains scandal and complexity. It keeps alive the possibility of the British case that there is some contention, there is some scandal here over the absent firman. And while we are distracted by scandal and the minutiae of the history, the British quietly continue their possession. Elgin is obviously going to... Can we set that one? So I claim we need to make this break. Okay, primarily in a way because marbles also reduces these items to property. It signals that they are only marbles. It allows the argument that the Parthenon sculptures can exist in separation. For me, the word marbles has become synonymous with pieces. Marbles by itself now has become a byword for fragmented objects. Sculptures subverts this idea. Sculptures, I think, is the correct term to refer to them, for after all, they are handmade objects, something that was touched by humans. They are not marbles. They certainly aren't the little round balls that little children play with. They're certainly not the kitchen bench tops that some people have in their homes. And they are not stones. So I'm very weary of the word. They are not found objects either. And nor are they just random pieces of Pentelic marble. So far from being a problem, I think changing this word and insisting on this word affords us an opportunity to re-engage and redefine the terrain. What then becomes interesting is the number of committees pushing for the reunification of marble that have marbles in their titles. The Australian Committee uses the word marbles. The British Committee uses the word marbles. Yet the American Committee uses the word sculptures. Why is there a difference? Are we describing the same things? What does this disparity, this inability to choose, tell the world about what kind of agreement we're coming to? In the Twitter handles, for example, of the Australian Committee, it is "at Marbles Unite." Now, I'm not saying it's an easy process, but if indeed enough is enough, then I think we should make the change and, in fact, bury the term marbles. I think, of course, this will also signal a new solidarity in our cause. It will show that somehow we have come to a new agreement. There were a few other issues. Have I got a few minutes, Dennis?
No.
Thank you, just a moment. Parthenon, an icon of global citizenship. I think global citizenship, for me, has serious and problematic implications. It introduces ideas such as universal heritage, world culture, that become themselves dangerously close to the very same arguments that the British Museum are using to justify the retention. Indeed, the idea of universal museum, as was quoted earlier, is that it is an institution of the world for the world. I mean, can we both be right? Is the claim that the British Museum are making and the claim that we are making, are they incompatible? I would argue that we both cannot be right. And so I think this is an area of exploration, and I'll certainly be raising it today and tomorrow. So what I think we are saying that is in fact, rather than a global citizen, that what we really are referring to is a citizenship of place. And for me, what this means is that clearly the Parthenon sculptures, they're an embodiment, they need to be together, and only then do they have meaning. The subsequent reinvention of the Parthenon sculptures into a global context happens after they are identified as a local phenomenon. I mean, after all, this is why we want them back in Athens. We want them in their local context. So I would simply make the point that for me there is a problem with simply saying that they are a global, an item of global citizenship. Okay, I'll move to the last point then. And this for me is one of the more exciting creative acts that I think we can participate in. And this is what I like to call the day they came home. We need imaginatively and detailed, beautifully written accounts of the day the sculptures came home. These fictional accounts will be those that describe in detail the story of this day, of the return of the sculptures to Athens. I claim that it is imperative to create these new narratives describing the details of this day. For of course, to imagine this day brings it that much closer to reality. And if we can imagine it in a global setting, then the global setting begins to imagine the possibility. For after all, language is one of the most powerful tools we have. So stop and imagine that day. Will it be a Saturday? What type of ceremony will it be? A simple and solemn ceremony? Will it be a cultural spectacle? Will it be a jubilant party? Which composer shall we engage for the music? Will there be dance?
Yes.
Who might write the poem for that day? How many poems will be written for that day? Will it become a public holiday in Greece? What route will the procession take? Will there be a procession? Will there be flower petals thrown over it? What types of film would be made? Indeed, what type of documentary could be made of the Parthenon frieze once it is in toto, in situ? And of course, quite a major point, how will we necessarily acknowledge the British? And this is a crucial point. What stories will we now start to tell about the British? We will now be able to affirm the integral role that the British have played in the story of the Parthenon. And that indeed we need to start imagining how that might, how we can include them in the story. For it is clear to me that to imagine that day brings it that much closer to reality. So in conclusion, I think it's not enough that we agitate and imagine possible scenarios. I think we need to return to the power of one word and what that would signal. And I think we need to abandon the word marbles and use the word sculptures. Thank you.